Trigger warning, heavy cursing. It's still an angering story. The lesson I took from this whole thing was to always read through your lease and rental agreement fully before signing. This story takes place 4 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading up city life for a less urban life was very challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move to be with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time, while I was left all alone to work and come home to a foreign place that I was very slowly becoming accustomed to. My roommate was also gone most of the time because he had a girlfriend. He would at least leave his dog with me though, so I never truly felt alone. I also had an old lady for a neighbor that would come and check up on me too. That's just kinda how people were in that area. I honestly found it kind of nice how many people knew their neighbors. I got to know everyone in my building's name after about 6 months of living there, all except for one. There was a man, I'd say in his early to mid-50s, who lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better description, just like a creep. He was balding except for the sides of his head, which had hair that was very straggly too. He was tall and kinda skinny. He had these outdated 90s glasses, the kind you'd see on America's Most Wanted. He also had a really thick creeper mustache. He was the only person in the entire building who wasn't friendly, or at least didn't make an effort to say hello or even introduce himself to me. He also happened to be the maintenance man for all 5 buildings. I didn't really think too much of this at first. Honestly, I don't really care if you're not overtly friendly to me. I enjoy having space of my own, and sometimes being too friendly can get a bit suspicious. That's just a personal problem, but I'm explaining why this didn't set up any red flags at first. One day, when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance man was standing in the center, staring directly at me. Maybe stare is the wrong word. It was more like a glare, very intense and focused. At first, I looked around confused, thinking that perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me. I was the only one there, though. Although a bit creeped out, I shrugged it off and continued on with my day, forgetting all about it pretty much. The next day, I was over at my neighbor Claire's apartment, the nice older lady. She happened to bring up a maintenance issue that she had, but mentioned she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad instead. She just said something along the lines of, "He's just a well-known creep around here." Fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 a.m. and I was still awake, but only just barely, sitting on the couch watching Parks and Rec alone in the apartment. I was just starting to drift off into sleep when I heard a soft noise near the front door. Thankfully, the show was very low in volume, because normally I wouldn't pick up on such a quiet noise most of the time. I turned off the TV and began listening intently. Next to the living room on the right side is the patio area, and on the left is the kitchen and the front door. The light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door. I could see the doorknob to the front door moving. Not just moving, but someone was using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet, with nowhere to hide at that point. I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. That's when I saw it was the maintenance man. My stomach dropped and he stopped dead in his tracks when he spotted me, looking as if it was unexpected to find me awake. I noticed he also had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even that cold on that particular night. I noticed that only because the jacket looked bulky, as if you were carrying things in it that I couldn't see. "What the fuck are you doing?" was all I managed to squeak out. I was shaking, my knees feeling like they were going to give out. For reference, I was a 22-year-old woman, standing at a whopping 5'4", with no way to defend myself at all from where I was standing. The man looked shocked, which made me feel as if I had gained a little bit of power in the situation. He retorted, confused and angrily, Your toilet is making a loud noise I could hear from my bedroom." I was angry and terrified, and only reacted with more anger when I saw him scrambling for excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 in the morning? I'm reporting this to management first thing." He stepped closer to me. I backed up a few steps but still stood my ground, quickly turning on the light closest to me so he could see my fury. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it now." Now I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear all coursing heavily through my body. "Get the fuck out!" He started to take the liberty to look around the kitchen where he was standing. My head immediately thought, shit, what if he goes for a knife? And that's when he said it. "You know, I can come in whenever I want." The sentence makes me shiver to this day. I didn't know what to do, and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling that something horrible was going to happen. "If you don't get the fuck out of my apartment right now, I'm gonna start screaming as loud as I can." My voice was cracking and shaky, which made my heart drop to my stomach. I immediately felt like I was going to be sick when he took yet another step towards me. "Check the lease. I can come in whenever I want. See you later." He winked at me, creating a wave of nausea, and I felt faint. He slowly turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him, even going so far as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day, I contacted management as soon as their office opened. I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere though, when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that the guy had entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me they do not allow any illegal activity, and took what I was saying very seriously. I thought to myself, yes, I've got him. Until the manager said this: "You can't just throw around accusations without proof. This man has dedicated over 20 years to working for this company, and we don't plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you'd read over your lease like you should have," yes, she was actually scolding me, "you would have seen the clause that states a maintenance worker has keys to the entire property, and if there's a maintenance issue, they're permitted access to the property at any time of day." This floored me. It couldn't possibly be legal. Of course, I'm from California, and of course, I didn't read the lease carefully. When I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment, and I had literally nowhere else to go. So if I were to be living there, I was going to have to sign it no matter what, and that's what I did. Needless to say, nothing got done about the issue. Fast forward again. A few days go by, and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak at all. Until I do. This time, I'm pulling in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I hadn't forgotten about the scary incident, but I had put it at the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other things, although I lost a bit of sleep over it. I parked my car facing the large lawn area again and started using my phone for a few minutes. I'm peering down at my phone when I glance up for a split second and see him standing there. He's standing across the lawn staring angrily at me, and I mean absolutely furious. I quickly looked back down and pretended to have not seen him, getting that sinking feeling again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case, and pretended to keep scrolling on my phone while subtly locking my door. I glanced up again, and this time he's stalking toward me very fast. I look in my rearview mirror hoping to see someone else that he may be stomping angrily toward. Of course, no one else was there. It's nearly dark now, but when he gets about 10 to 15 feet away from the front of my car, I can hear him shouting something. I couldn't make out what he was saying though. I put my phone down and am watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging on it with all his might. He slams his body into the door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle even though the doors are locked. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying to God that I remember to lock them all at this point. My hands are shaking so bad I'm having trouble even starting it. When I do, I realized what he was saying, which was a repeated loop of the following phrases. "I'm going to get you, bitch. I told you I can come in whenever I want. You really want to take me on? I'll kill you." I peeled out of there so fast I didn't even know where I was going. I drove to the next county over, found a motel, and stayed the night there. The next day I took work off and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what he'd said, but no matter what I told them, they would not believe me. This maintenance man was apparently God's gift to mankind or something. He was a monument to the company, and they appreciated his 20 years of service and dedication to them over him risking someone's life with threats. Long story short, I lost it. I called her a psychotic cunt and ended up getting evicted. I reported all of this to the police, but between the lack of evidence I had and his perfect record and shining references from his employers that seemed to love him, the police said there was nothing they could do to move forward at that point. My dad and I ended up finding a nice home about 10 minutes away from that place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbor, to the new house a few months later. She told me there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate and my dad had moved in there, that also left in a hurry after something happened with the maintenance man, something about taking photos of her walking to and from her apartment to her car. When she had confronted him about it, he had told her, "I can do whatever I want." I guess in Kansas City, maintenance workers are like God or something. They get away with whatever they want and have shining reputations. Needless to say, it's been 4 years, and I moved back to California. Okay, let's start from the beginning, shall we? I work in the leasing office at a property in Texas. I also live on site. We have about 400 apartments and take up 2 sides of a street. I live across the street in the very back, and I try to keep that to myself as much as possible. I do not like for residents to know that I live there. About 2 months in, a woman and her 2 grown sons lease an apartment with us. The sons are twins. One is special needs, and the other is, well, different. He had a very active imagination and was very focused on sex. Almost immediately after they moved in, things started getting very weird. The first encounter. One day, I was crossing the street after work to go home. As soon as I reached the other sidewalk, I hear a voice calling out to me. "Hey yo, Raquel!" I turned towards the voice, which I realized was coming from the bus stop at the end of the street. I couldn't recognize who it was until I got a bit closer. Who the fuck is that? I think to myself. We meet face to face, and I realize who it is from when he moved in. I knew he was a little bit weird, so I was trying to keep my distance while still being polite. He was really easy to piss off, and I didn't know what he was capable of. I didn't want to make him think there was anything else behind that polite hello. He starts telling me that I look just like his baby mama who lives in North Texas. He then jumps to a different subject about how he had just ran all the way from downtown to here, then decides to tell me his entire family history, naming all his cousins and homeboys, rambling on and on about essentially nothing. The entire time, I hadn't said a single word other than the standard, "Oh, okay." I kept taking steps backward to indicate that I was trying to leave, but he kept talking and moving closer and closer toward me. As I was trying to go, I noticed he had this huge boner. He was wearing basketball shorts as always, so it was pretty difficult to hide. This creeped me out, but somehow I managed to get away from him. He sat at the bus stop staring at me as I walked away. I didn't want him to know that I lived there, so I just kept walking down the street to make it look like I lived somewhere else. Every now and then, I would see him around the property, or he would come to the office and talk to me. It was always very uncomfortable. The leasing office had a hallway leading to the manager's office, the copier, and the package room. There was a door on it too, which came in handy quite a bit. His visits got to the point where every time I saw him walking up to the office, I would run and hide in this back room and let the other staff deal with him. He wasn't ever creepy towards them, and they knew the situation, so they were cool with it. Cut to December. Our office was being remodeled, so we were using our business center as a temporary workspace. It's only one room, and there's only one way in or out and no place to hide. I was alone in that office one day, and who should come walking in but my worst nightmare. He needed to borrow our copy of his mail key because he'd misplaced his or didn't have one or whatever. We have to take an ID in order to release keys, and he didn't have his, so he had to go to his apartment, get the ID, and come back. In the time that he was gone, I set my phone on my coworker's desk, and started recording video in case any crazy shit happened, so I would at least have evidence. He noticed the tattoo on my shoulder and commented on it, asking, "Is that your name?" or "Why the hell would I have my own name tattooed on myself?" I told him it was my grandmother's name, which sends him into this whole spiel about how he has his grandmother tattooed on him. He's an artist and draws people's faces. He leaves to go check his mail, then returns a few minutes later. However, when he returns, he's added something to his ensemble. He now has a pencil behind his ear, I suppose to make him look like more of an artist. He then said he was going to draw my face, but I had to send him a picture so he could look at an image of me. He said he would draw me and bring the picture to the office later that week. Note, I did not send him a picture. Months go by, no picture. I was walking through the pool to go walk to an apartment. He catches me in the pool area. Fuck, no escape. He presents me with, well, I don't really know what to call it. It's me, or I guess how he sees me. The picture was drawn on lined notebook paper in pen and looked like he threw it together in 3 minutes. He drew me black, I'm white, wearing a short, tight dress, not something I would ever wear. Legs 2 different sizes, carrying a purse with a Texas on it. It was very creepy. I kept it on my fridge to remind myself I was never safe with him around. Upon further inspection of this drawing on my fridge, I noticed as well that he'd drawn nipples on it under the dress. The next day, I talked to the maintenance man about it. He said he did originally draw it naked, but decided to put clothes on it because giving it to me like that would be too forward. What the fuck was wrong with this guy? Another day, I was walking out of one of the pool gates and he was walking in through another. I saw him out of my peripheral but didn't acknowledge him because, well, I'm sure you get it by now. "Hey yo, Raquel," he says in a very low voice. I'm hard of hearing, so I can get away with pretending I didn't hear someone sometimes. This made him very angry. The reason I know this is because he talks to one of our maintenance staff about me regularly. That person always relays the creepy, weird, delusional shit he says about me. According to him, I was very rude, and he don't play like that where he's from. The next few times I saw him, he had this deranged look in his eyes like he was disgusted by the sight of me. It honestly kinda looked like he wanted to hurt me. A few weeks go by and he apparently gets over being mad and resumes being the creepiest motherfucker alive. The maintenance man tells me he claimed to have met my boyfriend and that he's a cool dude so he's gonna back off. I asked my boyfriend if he had ever met him, and he said no. The maintenance man told me that he claimed to have met my parents when they stopped in for a visit too. I asked my parents if they spoke to or saw anyone while visiting me at work. They also said no. I don't know when or how he could even have met them or even saw them. I never saw him around when they were there. I confirmed from multiple different people that were there that he was nowhere around. I got the distinct feeling he might have been hiding in the bushes or something. Recently, I decided to use our fitness center late at night. The fitness center has big windows that overlook the second pool on my side of the property. While I'm on the treadmill, which is in front of one of these windows, he just appears, staring at me through the glass, waving at me, watching me. I pretend there's a glare in the window and I didn't see him. He disappears completely into the dark shadows in the pool area, and I continue my workout. The next day, the maintenance man tells me he talked to our friend, and he couldn't stop talking about how he'd seen me there. He went into detail about what I was wearing, how form-fitting it was, how sweaty I was, all creepy shit that gave me the chills. I avoided the fitness center after that, and used my real gym to avoid seeing him again. A few days go by and my informant, the lovely maintenance man, you get it, tells me that my stalker was wondering why I suddenly stopped going to the gym. Apparently ever since that fateful night he'd been returning every day to the pool around the same time to wait for me so he could watch me work out again. Nope. He started showing up at the office more frequently too, and I had to avoid him. Friday, he was sitting in the pool area by the office directly behind where my desk was. There was a huge window behind me. I turned to get something out of my cabinet, only to see him staring at me through the glass. He waved, I flashed a nervous peace sign and proceeded with my business. He was not in swimwear, but rather fully dressed. He had his notebook with him and was frantically drawing something. Great, here comes another picture of me, but this time in workout clothes or something. My coworker went to put up the golf cart and close the cabana. She has to go through the pool area to do this, so she got a glimpse of what he was drawing. A cross with my name down the middle. According to him, I had asked him to draw a tattoo for me, so that's what he was doing, drawing a tattoo for me that had my own name on it. It's bad enough that it was a cross, but with my name, that would burn my flesh. He says he's going to give it to me the next day. The next day, he didn't show up. I'm not sure when I'd ever asked him to draw anything for me, but I'm pretty sure the time was fucking never. 2 weeks passed, and I thought maybe he had finally given up. Enough time had passed for him to do so, and maybe I could use the fitness center once again. My friend and I went around 8 p.m., and we didn't see any signs of him, so we went ahead with our workout. I was flipping over to do leg raises on my right side, which caused me to face the door. Chills engulfed my entire existence, and my heart stopped for a second. He was standing across the street on the phone. I started to panic and find a place to hide from view. Peeking around the corner, I see him turn and walk through the outside hallway behind the leasing office, his normal route to his apartment. Hoping he wouldn't come back for a while, we decided to continue. I kept glancing out the windows every few seconds to make sure he hadn't reappeared, but he did. Still talking on his phone, but this time he starts pacing around the fitness center very slowly. Looking through the windows with this creepy-ass side glance like I wouldn't be able to see him there creeping. I keep trying to hide from view, and I'm waiting for an opportunity to get the fuck out of there. I'm hiding in a corner when he walks up to the locked door and knocks on it. He continues to knock for a solid 3 minutes, then finally leaves. He walks down the street a little way, and I take the chance to run the fuck back to my apartment as fast as I can. Today, my informant told me that the stalker said I wouldn't let him into the fitness center for a drink of water. He said he had just run all the way from insert popular place nearby and just wanted some water, but I refused to let him in. He then switched up his story and said he was trying to give me the drawing of the tattoo I had asked him for. 1. He didn't run from anywhere. He was wearing flip-flops. 2. He had been standing still for a good 30 minutes before coming up to the center. He had gone back to his fucking apartment, for Christ's sake, where there is water. So why the fuck would he go all the way to the fitness center for a glass of water? 3. He didn't have any drawing with him. He didn't have any pockets on what he was wearing either, and it wasn't in his hands. He then started talking to my neighbors that live across from me and started telling them I was a weird, crazy girl and they should stay away from me. That shook me to my core, because if that's true, then he somehow found out where I lived. I knocked on my neighbor's door and asked him about it. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. Luckily, this Friday is my last day at this property, as I'm transferring to a new one closer to where I want to live. I'll still have to live here for 2 more months, and I can't wait to leave. Trigger warning: themes of sexual assault. So I live in the PNW, which has a great number of excellent campsites. A favorite of mine isn't actually a designated campsite, but a forest road right on a river. Being a moody young woman, I would frequently make sojourns in my dumpy Toyota Camry to this one spot, so I could be alone on the river and meditate on whatever was bothering me. Camping alone as a 20-something female often inspired anxiety in both myself and my folks, but I wouldn't let that deter me. Camping alone was something I genuinely enjoyed doing, and after experiencing a series of emotional misfortunes, I needed some time to myself. The last time I ever went to this particular spot, I must have been around 21 years old. I had just had a closure conversation with someone who broke my heart some months prior, and wanted to take some time to process that. Luckily enough, I had gotten consecutive days off work from my retail job, so I packed up my car and made the 3-hour drive to the spot. The spot is fairly well known, and often a few other campers would be there on the weekends, but during the week it was more likely to be empty. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon. I was slightly disappointed to discover a turquoise Chevrolet truck and another silver car parked closest to the river. I parked some distance behind them and began to unload my things. 2 young gentlemen were hanging out by the truck, and as I passed by, they greeted me. I muttered a hello and kept on walking. I picked a spot I thought was nice and went back to get the rest of my things. As I was passing their cars again, one of the men, the shorter, stockier one, rushed to a boulder near the path where some pistols were sitting and quickly concealed them. "Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to scare you." There was something childlike in his manner, like he did this specifically so I would pay attention to him. I told him it was fine. It didn't bother me at all, and kept walking. I unloaded the rest of my things, set up my camp, and got a fire going. I was kind of tired after the long day of driving and hauling my stuff around, so I plopped down in a camp chair and got some chili mac cooking for dinner. It was a beautiful evening, not too hot, and golden hour on the river was always a fantastic sight, so I was thoroughly enjoying the moment. I could see the 2 men swimming upriver a bit, but it was easy enough to ignore them. By the time I finished eating, they passed by my camp on the opposite bank and were walking into the woods. I went down to the bank to get water for my dishes when I heard the stockier one call out to me suddenly. Hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm a good guy, okay?" Maybe this should have alarmed me more, but at the time it didn't. I definitely thought the guy was socially inept, but I left my judgments at that. I just elected to answer with a polite, "Okay." I wanted him to leave me alone, and thought if I was nice but uninterested, he'd take the hint. It was a demonstrably ineffective approach. Some time had passed by, and I had been musing over the last week's events and just generally enjoying the beauty around me when he came limping up to my camp. He feigned a grunt as if he was in pain. I don't exactly remember the exchange we had, but he wound up sitting at my camp and explaining to me that he had some injuries in the past that were adversely impacted by the cold of the river. Now, before I go any further, I'll preface this by saying I was a pretty passive person when I was younger, especially with strangers. I've definitely had to practice setting and maintaining boundaries as I've gotten older, and this instance demonstrates the danger of failing to do so. I kick myself every time I tell this story. I'm not sure if immediately telling the guy to piss off would have made him leave me alone, being a young, pretty girl alone in the woods, but I regret not speaking my mind more clearly that day. All that said, given some previous experiences, I had taken on a policy of engaging in active listening with others who seemed to be struggling. I obviously was faced with my own woes and wanted to be treated compassionately myself, so I aimed to always do the same with others. It was clear this guy was having some issues, and by all exterior judgments, he seemed like he was down on his luck, maybe even with some maladaptive tendencies. He continued to stay at my camp and began telling me all about his life. These stories were all pretty fantastical, the kind of lies a child would tell you of some incredible adventure or grandeur. They went on and got weirder and weirder. He explained that the aforementioned injuries that were paining him were the result of falling a great distance while on a welding job, where his hand was caught by being impaled by a piece of rebar. He described his heroic effort of self-preservation by unhooking himself and falling the rest of the distance, breaking his legs or something like that. I just gave him a series of, wow, that must have been very painful. He also revealed he was apparently recently homeless after splitting up with his girlfriend, who had been talking to another guy. That's why he was staying here in his truck, the aforementioned Chevy. He also told me he DJ'd at a joint in the closest town and made a lot of money doing it. He further increased his exaggerations by telling me he was also a 5-star chef and enlightened me on a gross-sounding dish of his own creation that was essentially a soup made from watered-down fruit jelly and other sweet things. Told me he was a Navy SEAL specializing in small arms. It was then he revealed to me that the pistols he thought had scared me before were just air pistols. He augmented his tale of being in special forces by doing some twirls with one of them and showing me what ultimately turned out to be mediocre marksmanship. At a later point, he even wound up giving me one of them, saying it made him think of doing bad things. I hesitantly accepted it. I was pretty sketched out by this point and wanted this dude to leave, but I lacked the backbone to tell him to go away. Unfortunately, as the evening wore on, he just continued to get weirder and weirder. By this point, he had begun bringing his belongings from his truck and setting them up around my camp. This was a process that happened gradually, each new conversation note eliciting a new show and tell idea. I can't remember all that he brought down, but it included his guitar and a lot of other stuff. He even tried to give me some of it, but after the air pistol, I declined. The conversation dragged on, eventually with him telling me in detail about childhood traumas as well. His father, who had been in the military, was very strict and often beat him. He also told me about his cousin who had sexually abused him severe enough to leave scars in certain areas, which he described to me in detail. He then got real close to me when he told me this, looking square in the eye, unblinking. "And that's why I'd never hurt you," he said, still staring at me. I shit you not, my skin started to crawl. I had a few things to defend myself with, a hunting knife and some bear spray, but he hadn't done anything directly threatening yet. Not long after this, his ex-girlfriend showed up. He introduced me as his friend, and they talked a bit before he kind of ignored her in favor of me. The whole thing made me even more uncomfortable. She didn't stay long and sped away in her truck. I'm assuming in some fit of jealousy. What did I do to deserve that? I didn't say anything other than that I was going to bed, hoping he'd take the hint and just leave. He said he needed some alone time to himself, and I thought I had lucked out. I went into my tent to bed down for the night, as it had gotten quite dark, only to discover a cheap ring had been left on my pillow. He must have placed it there when I stepped away to go to the bathroom or something. Furthermore, I could hear him wandering around my campsite. I peeked out of my tent. He had his head in his hands as he paced back and forth, muttering to himself. A powerful feeling of needing to flee immediately came over me. There was no way I could stay here. Even if he didn't do anything to hurt me, at minimum he would annoy me the whole 3 days I planned to stay. I immediately started to pack my stuff. When he asked what I was doing, I told him I was just going to go. Since I was car camping, I had a bit of stuff with me that would require a few trips. I hurried to get it all in my car. On one trip up the path to the parking area, he stood in the middle of the path, complaining my flashlight was blinding him. I didn't say anything and stepped around him. Most of my trips after that were unbothered, though I went with one arm free so I could carry my hunting knife and be ready in case he tried to get physical with me. On my second to last trip down, he came out of the dark from the direction of his truck. He was sobbing. "I didn't do anything wrong." I flat out ignored him and ventured down the path once more to grab what I could and hightail it to my car. I wound up leaving a cord of wood behind, not seeing it worth the danger to go back for it. I shut all my doors and hopped in, absolutely elated at the sound of my 30-year-old car starting right up. I got the hell out of there and drove the 3 hours back to my house. I didn't have reception until about halfway through the drive, during which point I called my mom and told her what happened. She was upset I didn't tell her where I was going. I told my dad and stepmom, who I lived with at the time, and that she was glad I was okay. When I got back, my stepmother asked what I was doing back so early. I explained what happened all over again. My dad later suggested I get a gun if I wanted to continue solo camping, in case something like that ever happened again. The next day, I went out to my car so I could drive to meet some friends, and found my tire had mysteriously gone flat. What an immense stroke of luck it didn't happen at the campsite, or somewhere else in the mountains where I didn't have reception. I'm in my mid-20s now, and moved to the city about 6 months ago. My roommate and best friend discovered that air pistol while he was helping me move. He knew I didn't own any guns, and was immediately confused thinking it was real. When he asked me about it, I laughed and explained everything that happened. I haven't been back to that site since, and while I'd definitely bring a friend there, I probably won't go alone ever again.